In the tradition of Malcolm X, peace be unto you. But we know in Memphis, Tennessee, there's no peace for the family of Tyre Nichols, the young man who was beaten to death by at least 6 police officers for what they claimed was a traffic violation, a claim that was contradicted by the police chief, who said there was no observable violation on the part of Tyre Nichols that night. A number of issues arise here surrounding his death. First, we have at least a half a dozen criminal procedure issues, violations of criminal procedure. But deeper beneath the thin veneer of police professionalism, there are very, very destructive emotional currents in motion that are observable if you've watched the video. People are asking why Black police officers were so callous and brutal against an unarmed man who, as he was being beaten in the first part of his ordeal, said aloud to the officers, and I quote, "I think you're going too far," end quote. There are reasons, though they point directly to irrational feelings which pervade policing in the United States, and we know that. We go back to George Floyd and dozens and dozens and dozens of other killings at the hands of police officers. And don't compare that to black on black killings because, as we all know, police officers are sworn to protect and serve. So there's a higher standard here that they are held to, not a street standard or no standards at all. In fact, the irrational emotions that we saw on display, those feelings support a culture of police cliques departments nationwide. Police are all clicked up nationwide. And many of them are just simply out of control. Now, this kind of behavior that we saw when those African-American police officers beat Tyre Nichols are not new in history. That kind of irrational display has manifested itself many times in the past. Take, for example, the Warsaw Ghetto in Poland during World War II. This is a very good example. In Warsaw, thousands and thousands of Jews were rounded up and caged in a small city block by Nazis. You know, the Nazis of Adolf Hitler. The irony, which relates to what happened to Tyre Nichols, is that the Nazis chose Jews to guard Jews. The Jewish guards were organized into semi-military groups and given batons, clubs. Their job was to keep Jews in ghettos in line. They did keep Jews in line as they starved to death on the streets by brutal beatings. Over time, the Jewish guards came to identify with their Nazi overseers because they wanted to be close to the power which ruled over them. As a reward, they were given clean accommodations, clothing, and good food, and even wine. With their perks, they could manipulate their Jewish compatriots to do things for them. The Nazis employed Jews for the same purpose in concentration camps that were all over Eastern Europe and in Germany. It's called the Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome. It is a mind state in which the victim comes to identify with their abusers so much so that they act like them. That is what we see happening with the Jewish guards. There is a famous quote by Malcolm X, which encapsulates the meaning of the Stockholm Syndrome perfectly. Do you remember the quote in a speech he gave when he said, and I quote, "We be sick, master," end quote. The movie The Django typified the house Negro, Stephen, as the quintessential house Negro. Deep down inside, he hated himself and targeted other black people for abuse who reminded him of his self-hateful image. He was actually subconsciously abusing himself, but acting it out on other slaves who appeared like him. His behavior typifies even the bourgeois attitudes and behaviors today. They employ nuanced emotional terrorism too on black people. A lot more difficult to detect their benign forms of terrorism. Now, yet another dimension of that is the psychological profiling of applicants for police officer positions. Some of the characteristics that are sought are a military background, low IQ or below average, no questions asked, people who do not exercise critical thinking, and measurably low empathy. Those are some of the characteristics sought in applicants in their psychological interviews. But here's something I want to make you aware of that relates again to the beating and the killing of Tyre Nichols. Here's something to think about. Just recently in September of 2022 in Alameda County, California, a significant number of county deputy sheriffs were released from duty because of mental health problems. 10% of the force was released from duty. 47 deputies were stripped of guns and their duties after receiving unsatisfactory scores on psychological examinations. And hundreds of cases may have to be thrown out of court based upon the findings of the psychological examination. In other words, they should have never been sheriffs, deputy sheriffs. All of that explains why Tyre Nichols is dead, beaten to death. That explains why we are all in danger. Police clique departments are a clear and present danger to us all. I am Dr. Stephen Nur Ahmed. Peace be unto you.